I shared my mother's apartment. The king's rooms were on the lower floor. He seemed annoyed about this, and I decided to move down beside him. Louis was born at St. Cloud and wished us to stay in Paris. In order to follow him there, I was forced to leave my mother and my son. Furthermore, I was obliged to conquer my grief at being surrounded by objects which recalled the loss I had sustained. Unappreciative of what I was doing for him, my husband remained cold and self-centered, rewarding my efforts to please him neither by word nor glance. While we had been on our journey, our physician had urged him either to advance or postpone the date of our return to Paris for fear that the moment of our arrival there might not be favorable to my health. Nothing could change Louis's plans. The carriage in which we drove daily from Paris to St. Cloud, where we dined, came from the imperial stables and was very comfortable. So much so, indeed, that I was one day so badly jolted as to become ill and be in danger of a miscarriage. I spoke to the king about it, asking him to allow me to stay that night at St. Cloud, as I felt really unwell. "You know that this would inconvenience me," he replied shortly. This reply crushed me. It was so cruel that I felt it gave me the right to consider myself freed from one set of duties and in a position to give myself wholly to other obligations. As a crowning piece of misery, the king wished to return to Holland and take me with him. In vain, my medical advisor declared that the injuries my long and frequent journeys had inflicted on me made such a trip entirely impossible for at least another 4.5 months. My husband pretended not to understand these reasons, told me that I was a better judge of what was good for me than my physician, and that I should be all right in 2 weeks. He repeated this statement until the moment of his departure, saying, "I shall expect you in 2 weeks." How could he be so inhuman towards his wife when he was kind enough to other people? During our last trip, I had seen him sympathize with the illness of the son of a poor peasant, have the sick boy cared for by his own doctor, and delay our departure in order to look after this utter stranger. Before we were married, he frequently went without his private carriage in order to lend it to a young boy who was in poor health. It seemed as though I were the only being for whom he reserved all his harshness. And yet that was what he called love. Is it surprising that this word has always filled me with terror? Madame de Broc left me in order to rejoin her husband, who wished her company. All her personal feelings made her desire my return to Holland. Yet, eager as she had been for a reconciliation to take place between me and my husband, she was equally convinced now that all hope for our future happiness together must be given up. As she loved me, she could not see why, after I had attempted to achieve the impossible, I should submit to this new sacrifice. Consequently, she entreated me to remain in Paris for my confinement. "I will conceal nothing from you," she said. "I promise to tell you the truth about the king. If I again discover any traces of that suspiciousness, that malevolence toward you, which you are unable to stand any longer, if I hear him make any more of those statements which sully your reputation, I will not hesitate to advise you not to return to him. Your life is necessary to your children and to your friends, and those with whom you come in contact will know how to judge your conduct." "My dear Adele," I replied, "my life in Holland was such that if I return there, it will only be as means of putting an end to my existence. I feel that at the present time, my life belongs to someone else, and I must care for my health in order that he may live. If I survive my confinement, and I do not believe I shall do so, you will see me again in Holland. I care too little about what becomes of me to have the will to resist the forces that urge me thither. My fate lies there. I will return, come what may." Adele's departure saddened me. I had nevertheless consented to her going away. She would be happy in the company of her worthy husband. It had been agreed we should write one another when the opportunity occurred and place the letters in hat boxes or other packages, as we were convinced that otherwise our correspondence would be opened and read. After my husband had left for Holland, I remained at St. Cloud. One day after dinner, the emperor said to me, "Go and put on your simplest gown and a hat. Take your lady-in-waiting with you, and we shall pay a visit to the St. Cloud fair." The empress had a headache and did not care to accompany us. I hastened back quickly to the drawing room, but my Dutch lady-in-waiting took so long to change her dress that the emperor grew tired of waiting for her, and we set out alone on foot. The emperor gave me his arm. The aide-de-camp, General Bertrand, who happened to be on duty, walked beside us. We soon reached the main alley of the park, which formed the center of the fair. We kept some distance from the different booths in order not to be recognized, for whenever a crowd caught sight of the emperor, he would be surrounded amid cheers. This obliged him to hurry back to the palace. Often we saw him returning from a little walk, almost carried shoulder high by a mob, and swearing that he would never be caught again. On this particular occasion, as he had a lady with him, no one paid any attention to him. Moreover, night was coming on. The throng pushed its way toward the gates. We, meanwhile, continued to look at the sights of the fair. The voiture nomade caught our eye, and being out to see the sights, we took the opportunity to investigate it. While General Bertrand was paying for our admission, the emperor began talking to the showman regarding the usefulness of his machine and embarrassed him greatly by the directness of some of his questions. When we came out, the crowd jostled us so violently that the emperor was worried about me. He hastened to drag me into the first show booth we came across. It happened to be a tent containing an exhibition of wax figures representing the signing of the peace treaty at Tilsit. Around a large table were seated figures representing the Emperor of Russia and Emperor Napoleon. In addition to these, and for what reason I cannot tell, there had been added figures of the entire imperial family, which had probably been used on other occasions, while the Sleeping Beauty reclined in one corner. There was hardly anyone present to admire all these masterpieces. Nevertheless, the showman delivered his usual lecture, and we heard ourselves described one after the other. We were about to leave when we noticed that General Bertrand had not come into the tent with us. The crowd had separated us from him, and as neither the emperor nor I ever had any money with us, we both were much embarrassed. The situation struck me as so odd and amusing that I could not restrain my mirth, and my amusement increased as the emperor's embarrassed manner. The more uncomfortable he looked, the more I wanted to laugh. There was nothing to be done but wait patiently for General Bertrand to find us. In order to pass the time, we examined rather more closely the waxworks. I questioned the man in charge about each of the different portraits. He assured us that they were all excellent resemblances, and particularly praised that of the Queen of Holland, which seemed to have a particular attraction for me. It was true the complexion was delicately colored, and the face quite charming. Indeed, I must confess that he had given my name to the most attractive of the wax figures. Nevertheless, the way her hair was done showed such a lack of taste that I felt rather ashamed. I ventured to advise the showman to change the position of a string of pearls that fell over one eye and gave her a far from refined expression. As a result of my comments, he set about adjusting her coiffure according to my indications, and did so with such gravity that the emperor was not able to keep serious over what he called a piece of feminine vanity on my part. Even the showman himself began to laugh. But it was time for our fun to cease, as the emperor began to be rather impatient. If General Bertrand did not put in an appearance, it was evident that we should be obliged to reveal our identity in order to escape from our predicament. Before doing so, however, I had the idea of standing by the door where the general could see me from a distance. It was less likely to be recognized than the emperor. The general finally did catch sight of me. He had been looking for us anxiously everywhere. He hurried up, all out of breath, and allowed us to make our escape. We hastened to return home and amused the empress greatly by our account of our adventures. Such moments of merriment, however, were rare indeed, and I still had difficulty in escaping my worries and fortifying my health, which continued to decline. The court moved to Fontainebleau. I was obliged to make the trip by water because of my extreme weakness. This had been increased by the fact that at a ball given by the Grand Duchess of Berg in honor of the marriage of Prince Jerome, the emperor, in spite of my protests, which he blamed on my state of depression, had forced me to dance. The court's stay at Fontainebleau was enlivened by all sorts of amusements. In the morning, there would be elaborate hunting expeditions in the forest or lectures on physics by the famous professor Charles. In the evening, there would be either a play, concert, or dance in the apartment of the empress or in those of the princesses. I was excused from taking part in the hunting parties and occasionally would go and paint in the forest near the palace. In the evening, I held a reception or I went to my mother's apartment. Many foreign princes visited the imperial court. Those I saw the most frequently were the Prince of Baden, the Prince of Coburg, and the Princes of Mecklenburg. One of the last names interested me, particularly because he had just lost his wife, sister of the Emperor of Russia, and was overcome with grief. As I rarely went out and was obliged to remain more and more on my chaise longue, everyone was kind enough to come and take tea with me and bring me the latest news of what was going on. My husband wrote rarely. He accused me of not having kept my word because 2 weeks after his departure from Paris, I had not appeared in Holland. Consequently, he no longer spoke of my return, but demanded that his son be sent to him. The child was extremely delicate, and the doctors declared that the Dutch climate would not agree with him. This was a cause of new worries and anxiety for me. To send him to a place where his health would be in danger was a terrible idea. I explained all my reasons to my husband. I forwarded all the reports to the physicians. But he had made up his mind to have what he wanted, and I felt that in the end I should be obliged to give in. The King of Westphalia had just been created, and Jerome with his wife went to Kassel, the new capital. The Princess of Baden returned to her husband at Mannheim, and the Grand Duchess of Berg and I were left alone in the midst of a still brilliant court. The petty annoyances and vexations of everyday life exist at court as they do elsewhere, and are still more disagreeable there on account of the stately and solemn setting. The glorious peace of Tilsit had restored order and general happiness. All hopes seemed to have been realized, all wishes fulfilled. Nevertheless, those on whom the emperor had conferred power and wealth were uneasy. They scrutinized the future and were alarmed at the apparent lack of stability of the regime. For the first time, the topic of a divorce between the emperor and his wife was openly discussed. The emperor, it is true, had not said a single word in regard to it as yet, a fact which caused the friends of the empress to consider such remarks as were made to be due merely to the hostility of certain individuals. Having been asked by my husband to present some special petition to his brother, I requested and was granted an audience. It was at a time when the king was sending back from Holland many Frenchmen belonging to his bodyguard. The emperor was annoyed and displeased with him. He showed this plainly by the way in which he received me. I attempted to soothe him, as I usually succeeded in doing. I begged him to allow Frenchmen to wear the Order of Holland, which Louis had recently created, and thus recognize the existence of this order. The emperor declared that as far as he was concerned, he would never wear it, for the king had instituted it at a time when he was asked not to do so. A few days later, he granted one of the ministers, Napoleon, permission to wear this decoration. I also spoke about my husband's wish to have his son with him in Holland, and the doctor's fears as to the effects of the climate on the child's health owing to his frail constitution. This was the emperor's answer. A father asks that his son join him. The child is not yet 7 years old. I cannot prevent his departure. He is the only boy in the family. If he returns to Holland, he will die, as his older brother did, and the entire French nation will oblige me to obtain a divorce. People have no confidence in my brothers, who, moreover, are all self-seeking and ambitious. Eugène does not bear my name, and in spite of all my efforts to restore peace, my reign will be followed by complete anarchy. Only by having a son to succeed me can matters be arranged. If I have not yet secured a divorce, the only thing that has restrained me has been my affection for your mother, for all France is anxious to have me do so. This was obvious at the moment of your son's death. Everyone believed that I was his father. You know how absurd such an idea is, yet it was impossible to prevent all of Europe thinking the child was my son. He stopped a moment, noticing my surprise, and then went on. The public did not think the worst of you on that account. You are generally considered to be moral in your conduct, yet everyone thought this was true. After a pause, he continued. It was perhaps just as well to have people think so. I considered his death to have been a great misfortune. I was so overcome that, As I stood beside the fireplace, I was not able to utter a word. The remark, "It was perhaps just as well that people should think so," seemed to tear a veil from my eyes. It caused a turmoil in my brain and struck deep into my heart, wounding me more than all the rest of the emperor's words. Was it possible that while he had been treating me as his daughter, while I had been glad and grateful to look upon him as a father who took the place of the one I had lost, all these attentions, this solicitude, was the result of deliberate planning and not of spontaneous affection? The thing that is dearest to a woman, her reputation, had in this instance been sacrificed for reasons of state, instead of being protected by the man who should have been the first to do so. Those marks of affection which the emperor had bestowed on me, and which I considered both precious and gratifying, furnished additional proof of my shame in the eyes of the world. The emperor had been able to conceive the idea that I might be guilty. His compliments, instead of being, as I had considered them, sincere tokens of his esteem, had doubtless been empty phrases prompted by political motives. Instead of being my friends, the people about me were perhaps merely courtiers seeking the favor of the mother of the emperor's heir. I had perhaps been simply an instrument by which ambitious persons had hoped to gain their ends. Ah, how dreadful it is to have one's illusions shattered so rudely. Yet I admit this first movement of indignation passed off quickly. Evil that comes from without, and of which we do not cherish the secret sting within our own bosoms, strikes us, but is powerless to inflict deep wounds. My heart was pure, and I knew that truth is not to be found at the courts of monarchs. That where ambition holds the center of the stage, one cannot expect to find either sincerity or rectitude. Only I could not help feeling sorry for my lot. Since then, I have thought over this conversation with the emperor, and having grown more familiar with his character, I've come to believe that the words I treated so seriously were uttered merely as a passing phrase. I am convinced that he never could have credited a gossip which cast an unpleasant light on my character. He had enough enemies who sought to slander him in every way, without himself offering them additional material. The verses printed in reply to an English newspaper attack which I had asked Bourrienne to explain to me shortly after my marriage were proof enough that he did not wish any discreditable reports about my conduct to be put in circulation. At the moment, however, I did not reason so clearly, and for a long time I felt repulsion toward the emperor on account of what he had said. His mention of a divorce had also struck me, and I was therefore less astonished than I should have otherwise been when later my mother told me of an interview she had had with the chief of police, Fouché. Fouché had come to her and said that all France wished the emperor to obtain a divorce, that so far he had not considered it, but that in the end he would be obliged to yield to public opinion. Fouché even went so far as to show my mother the rough draft of a letter he advised her to write the Senate, and suggested it would be best if she were to be the one to take the first steps in the matter of securing the separation. Previously, a divorce had seemed to me to be entirely out of the question, but my conversation with the emperor caused me to fear that he was already acquainted with Fouché's proposals. The empress could not make up her mind what to do, and I did not dare advise her in regard to so delicate a matter. Yet when she obliged me to express an opinion, all I told her was that if I were in her place, I should go to the emperor, reproach him for treating me in this underhanded manner, and ask him to formulate his wishes clearly. If he showed that he wished to divorce, I would not stay with him another instant. At the same time, I took care to advise my mother to act as she thought best, for her affection for the emperor might cause her to differ from my point of view. As a matter of fact, having discussed the matter at length with her various ladies in waiting, and especially with Madame de Remusat, the friend of Monsieur de Talleyrand, in whose judgment she had special confidence, the emperor decided to reply to Fouché that she would not take any action to defend herself. She did not speak to the emperor either, but he shortly afterwards was informed of the advice Fouché had given the empress.